why it is that they took our money for so long and yet betrayed us and gave it to the people they were supposed to be using it to fight against. And it certainly is true that the book is taken very seriously in the Islamic world. And that even if I do not have a general who is using these texts that I just quoted to you and explained, there are certainly plenty of jihadist writings that quote the Quran and that explain what they're doing by virtue of the Quran. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the 9/11 mastermind, you know the guy who, the famous picture of him with his hair all crazy and the t-shirt, and he just woke up and he's getting arrested. He looks like my brother in that picture. But anyway, I saw my brother like that many times in the early mornings, even if he wasn't arrested. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other plotters, they recently wrote a letter. A few months ago, they wrote a letter to the judge in their case. And they explained with copious passages from the Quran that they were doing what they understood to be their Islamic duty. But there was one thing that they said that stuck out that nobody noticed, that was extraordinary. And that was that he said, we have the religious duty to fight you because of your infidelity. But we are fighting you now because of these various grievances. And then he trotted out his laundry list of all the evils of America, which Barack Obama shares. But notice that. It would be our duty to fight you for your infidelity alone. And the Quran actually does say to fight against the Jews and the Christians until they convert to Islam or submit to Islamic rule. And it never says, fight the Jews and Christians who have offended you with colonialism, or fight the Jews and Christians whose foreign policy you find objectionable, or fight the Jews and Christians who in some way have sinned against you so that you have a grievance. It says, fight the Jews and Christians, period. The implications of that are this. Barack Obama thinks that he can, by various concessions, by various accommodations, by various gestures of goodwill, blunt the force of the jihad against the West. But ultimately, Osama bin Laden said it best on October 6, 2002, in his letter to the American people. He said, the first thing we are calling you to is Islam, which is completely in line with the Quran's injunction to fight against Jews and Christians, period, full stop. And it means, in other words, that no amount of goodwill showing, no amount of accommodation, no amount of concessions is going to do anything to keep at least some Muslims from considering that they have a religious duty to fight against us. And they will keep going. Now, of course, talk about financing your own destruction. We're paying for this by means of the Saudi oil money, not only in Pakistan. And there has been no effort really to free us from that, although, of course, there are the familiar tropes about the Alaskan reserves, the offshore drilling, all these things. A president that was really concerned about national security would be doing that, because he takes away the money that they have to finance this, then it's going to be a lot less formidable than it appears now. But right now the Saudis are financing not just terrorism, although they're certainly doing that, but they are financing efforts of dawah, which is Islamic proselytization. Now, Islamic proselytizing is very interesting and something that you need to be aware of. Islamic proselytizing, in the first place, is a duty for Muslims, as it is for Christians, to try to spread the faith. But you know those the Baptists who might knock on your door, or the Mormons who will knock on your door? If you tell them, no thanks, I don't really want to convert, they'll go away. They won't slash your tires. They won't throw a brick through your window. They will be very polite, and they'll leave. They might come back, but that's it. Now, in Islam, in the Quran, and in the teachings of Muhammad, he says, first invite the unbelievers to accept Islam. If they accept it, then don't fight them. If they refuse, then invite them to pay the jizya, which is the tax, that is the hallmark of the second-class status that is mandated for non-Muslims in the Islamic society. And if they refuse both of those, then go to war. And so it's like the nice boys come to your door and they ask you to convert and you say no, and then they shoot you. Or they slit your throat. Now, I'm not saying this is literally happening. Obviously, it's not. But it is nonetheless something that here again proceeds from an understanding of what is happening from the beliefs of the people who were proceeding along these lines. And so in other words, when Barack Obama wants to make all these concessions to the Islamic world, he's doing so based on an ignorance or a willful denial of the fact that there is this imperative to fight on against us no matter what we do. No matter how nice our foreign policy becomes, no matter if a Palestinian state is established with contiguous borders, it ain't going to end anything. So, if all that effort is useless, and if billions spent for anti-terror efforts in Pakistan are useless, and if other efforts at conciliation are useless, is it all lost? No, certainly not. Because in a free exchange of ideas, which is of course rapidly being challenged, did you know that Barack Obama actually reversed Bush administration policy at the United Nations in regard to the criminalization of Islamophobia? That there every every year, the Organization of the Islamic Conference puts through a resolution at the UN at the UN Human Rights Council to criminalize criticism of Islam. They talk about defamation of religions, but Islam is the only one ever mentioned. Now, what is criticism of Islam? Everything I've told you about Islam today is true. So is that criticism? Is that hate? They would say so, yes. As a matter of fact, specifically specified in the OIC resolution draft was the criminalization of counter-terror efforts that purported to explore the motives and goals of the terrorists by looking at the Koran. The Bush administration had opposed this resolution year after year, and it passed. But then they would veto it. Obama had the United States co-sponsor it with Egypt, and it passed last week with United States sponsorship. Now, you might think, well, we have the First Amendment, so he can't pull that here. It's just a fig leaf. It's just an empty gesture. But for the first time, we have the President of the United States and the government of the United States in an international forum saying that United States law is wrong and ought to be changed, essentially. They're not saying that directly, but by sponsoring this kind of legislation, they are saying it. The upshot would be, of course, to render us mute and defenseless in the face of the Islamic Jihad advance. You can't talk about it. You can't devise ways to resist it. Right now, even to talk about what I'm talking about now is on the outer limits of political incorrectness. And most people don't dare, including some of your favorite conservative hosts. You know, they don't dare talk about these things. But if we don't talk about them, if we don't talk about them as a society, if we don't resist the efforts to curtail free speech and the Obama administration's opposition, manifest opposition to free speech, and if we don't start speaking realistically about the Quranic imperatives that fuel this struggle, then all is lost. Because obviously you can't defeat an enemy that you can't know, that you don't understand, that you refuse to understand, unless you can't devise any kind of comprehensive response to his challenge. But all is not lost. As long as there is life, there is hope. As long as we stand for the civilization that is the greatest civilization on earth, and we should say that unapologetically, and say that we stand for these principles of human rights that many Muslims live by and value. They're just afraid to stand up and say so because they know what would happen if they did. But if we were a more certain trumpet ourselves, there would be many who would rally to the standard. And if we were standing more firmly for human rights, for the non-establishment of religion, for the equality of rights of all people, for the freedom of speech and the freedom of conscience, then there would be a tremendous support even among Muslims for what we are doing. But pretending, building policy, fantasy-based policy making, building policy upon fictions, upon misapprehensions, is simply the road to disaster. And so what I would leave you with today is that I would say the fundamental thing that is imperative to do in opposing the Obama administration is to try to educate legislators on our own side, to speak about these issues more intelligently, and to devise legislation that helps us to fight it more effectively. And that should be a high priority in any kind of strategizing for 2010 and 2012. Thanks very much.